Hello and welcome to another edition of Ideological. I'm your host, Zach Dangerous Lee. You see how that works with my last name? I need a better nickname. If you watch the show New Girl, which is hilarious, by the way, it's not just for girls. There's a great scene where Nick and Schmidt are back in college, and he goes, "Man, I used to just sleep with so many women. They used to call me the sex haver." And he's like, "Cool name, dude." So I need something like Zach the sex haver Lee or something, some cool nickname. I'll let you come up with one. Today, we are talking about something that is fascinating, especially with the time period in which we live, which is America's kind of two-party system. So because I'm interested in philosophy, politics, and culture, this will be a political lecture, and we're going to talk about the differences between the two main parties in the U.S., primarily being the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Now, anytime you talk politics, people freak out.
Don't freak out. I forbid anybody to freak out.
And they think that your explanation is unfair, even if you're totally fair. They don't like the way that you describe something, even if it's 100% accurate. So let me just say this out of the gate. I am going to try to be as unbiased as I can. I'm going to just try to honestly give you the facts. I can't be completely unbiased. On certain issues, I'll lean more right. On certain issues, I'll lean more left. I'll give you an example. I like guns, so I will lean right there. But I also think marijuana should probably be legal, and so I'd probably lean left there. None of this has to do with morality. It just has to do with legality. And so you're going to see some areas probably where my biases come out, but I'm going to try to do this as fairly as I can. Let me say it another way. If you don't like the way that I'm explaining something, or if you don't like a particular fact I give, it might be because you don't like the fact, not because I'm spinning it. I have found in talking to people about their political views, a lot of times they don't even know what their own party holds. Okay? So let's talk briefly about the history of these. There's other parties. There's the Green Party, right? There's independents. There's my favorite, I think, is Teddy Roosevelt's the Bull Moose Party. Awesome. I just want to vote for that, regardless of their policies, just for the name, right? You've got the donkey, you've got the elephant, and then you've got the bull moose. And so, but today we're primarily talking about the two parties that actually ever gain any sway, Democratic Party and Republican Party, the Democrats and the Republicans. Let's do a brief history, and then I want to go over something like, 25, 26 differences between the parties of where they are today. So let's just jump into the history, and here we go. First of all, the original framers of the Constitution were very wary of political parties. When you start getting partisanship, all of a sudden people don't care about necessarily what's best for everybody. They just try to go with their tribe, and so they were concerned about that. Alexander Hamilton and George Washington. He's kind of a big deal. He invented quarters. Kidding. We're both concerned about what political parties would do. What happened, though, is you started getting groups that were more federalistic. They were focusing more on the ways the states could work together. Let me say this a stronger way. America was never meant to just be like America. It is the United States of America. We are a federation of states that team together for certain things like constitutional rights, to have a military. There's some benefits, trade with other countries, et cetera. There's some benefits of being part of this group. And so what you have eventually, though, is you have Washington, Hamilton, and Adams supporting what is called the Federalist position. And you have Thomas Jefferson and James Madison supporting the anti-federalist position. If you want to understand more about federalism, if you want to understand more about the arguments for teaming up together as part of a nation instead of just being separate independent countries as little states, obviously the Federalist Papers would be a great place to start. Now, eventually what happened is this. The party of Jefferson, that was more anti-federalist, was called the Democratic Republicans, which is where we get these names. It's kind of confusing because those are opposites today, but it was the Democratic Republicans, which is kind of like calling somebody, if they're a baseball fan, you're like, you're the Yankees-Red Sox position. And you're like, wait, the Yankees and the Red Sox are like a famous rivalry. They don't go together. But anyway, that's where the terms come from. You have the party of Jefferson being the Democratic Republicans. The party would eventually split between Jackson and the Democrats. Okay, now this is going to blow your mind. Let me say this. I'm going to say this several times. The positions that the parties hold today are almost the opposite of how they were founded. Okay?
Wait, what?
So the party of Jefferson was called the Democratic Republicans, but eventually you get this split and you get Jackson and the Democrats, which originally were for states' rights and minimal government. Notice that's the opposite as they are today. And you got the Whig Party, which was more in support of like a national bank and more about this bigger government banding together. So notice at this point you have, under Jackson, you have the Democrats and then you have the Whigs. The Democratic Party was officially started in 1828 and the Republican Party in 1854. You'll get different dates online. It's hard to nail down sometimes officially when this counts because there's these preliminary parties and all this stuff. But those are good estimates as far as the dates that they were started. So you get the Democrats, you get the Whigs. The Whigs are eventually going to fizzle out, and then you get the Republicans. The Republican Party was born and made up of former Whigs, Democrats, and independents, and they specifically band together to fight against the issue of slavery. Remember, guys like Abraham Lincoln, he's a Republican, and the Republican Party originally is there to fight against slavery. That's one of the major platforms that they promoted when they were started. So now you have the Democrats, which are primarily pro-slavery. You have the Republicans, which are against slavery. You have the Democrats primarily in the South. You have the Republicans primarily in the North. You have the Democrats for states' rights. You have the Republicans more for a bigger national kind of system, which is extremely different. And so that's how they started those. So again, I'm not commenting on whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying that's where the parties started. You're going to see that they're going to take a pretty big shift. After the war, the Republican Party pushed for economic growth. They kind of became the party of industrialization. Remember, a lot of them were in these northern states where you have factories and industry and these kind of things. So they kind of pushed for big business. And that really made them the party of wealth in the early 1900s, right? So if you talk to your grandparents or great-great-grandparents, they probably still see the Republican Party as the party of wealth, of rich, big businessmen. That was kind of the thing in the early 1900s. What shifted? The big shift is going to come with what is called the New Deal. So after the Great Depression, when everything sucks monetarily, don't put all your money in the stock market, by the way. After everything is bad monetarily, that you've got the market crash, you get the Great Depression. It was FDR that instituted a number of liberal government programs in what was called the New Deal. This caused conservative Democrats to become Republican. So this is kind of a breaking point in the parties where they're going to say, wait a second. As a Democrat, I've always been for states' rights and in the South and these kind of things, smaller government, but these Republicans have gotten wealthy and the stock market crashed and I need help. And there starts to be this shift. Black Americans traditionally have supported the Republican Party due to its anti-slavery platform. However, due to the progressivism and pro-civil rights views of Harry S. Truman, Black people became increasingly more aligned with the Democratic Party. So you get this slow shift of what the parties were originally versus what they are today, which I just find fascinating, okay? Fascinating. But that's where these parties come to prominence throughout time. These aren't the only parties that exist. They're not the only parties that have ever existed. I want somebody to get like real fired up about like the Whig Party. Like they run and they're like, we need this issue, and they just freak out and they wear wigs. That would be fantastic.
My wig!
Anyway, so today the parties are almost the opposite, not in every area, but in a lot of areas that they started out as, or as which they started out. Again, all incidences and preposition, but only if I have to. Let's talk about the political parties today. Okay, so there's a brief history, a short history. I don't think that's what's most interesting about this lecture. What's interesting are the positions. So first of all, let's talk about the positions. You have the Democrats and you have the Republicans. First of all, the terms left and right. Why do we call the Democrats the left and we call the Republicans the right? That has to do with seating of the National Assembly during the French Revolution. Okay. The left was the more radical faction that was wanting more of a change, whereas the right, those that sat on the right in the National Assembly, were more of the conservatives, right? More of the conservative faction, which is what you have with these terms today. The original color of the left, though, was not blue. Today we do red and blue. The original color of the left is red. Okay, so think about groups that are more socialistic or communistic. Typically the color is red. So you have this, for example, with the USSR before they became Russia. You have this with North Korea. You have this with China. Red is the color of collectivism. Okay, and so originally the left's color was red and the right's color was white, which has nothing to do with white supremacy. It was just this conservative, traditional, even some people that were pro-monarch was the color of the right. But that was it. So different colors. Originally, red was left. This is why you got during the Cold War, there was a popular phrase, which is better dead than red. That doesn't mean that they hated the Republicans or something like this. What it meant is that they didn't want to give in to communism. Again, red was the color of communism originally. So brief history, left, right, red, blue, was going to say? I might be having a stroke. Am I smiling with my whole face? Let's talk about the differences between the political parties. By the way, don't contact me. These are very broad strokes. I'm going to say some of these and you say, Zach, that's a little bit of an oversimplification. I know this is a podcast. I'm trying to summarize everything in contemporary politics in a short podcast. So of course, this is going to be crass, too broad strokes. Some of you are going to hate it, but if you'll pay attention and you'll have an open mind, you're going to learn a lot from your boy. This is why I'm here. Okay? Let's talk about some differences of the political parties. First of all, you have one side that is liberal or progressive, the left, and another that is more conservative, the right. What do those terms mean? If you are somebody who is liberal or progressive, here's what that means. It means you think that because there's been a lot of bad things in the past, there's been oppression, there's been inequality, there have been wars that didn't have to happen, etc. You have a tendency to say, let's change, let's move to something in the future. You have a tendency to say that truth, goodness, and beauty, you have a tendency to say that what would work best in a society or a state is something that we move toward. It's in the future. Truth, goodness, and beauty is something we look to the future to find, and that's something that we are progressing, hence the term progressive, toward. That is the idea, okay? Things were done in the past, not great. There was the Inquisition, and people were burned at the stake, and all these kind of things. We need to look in the future and figure out the best way to run society because what we did in the past has not worked. If you're a conservative, you say what worked in the past is what's going to work in the future. In fact, the past worked great. That's how we got to today. Yes, it wasn't perfect. Yes, there were a lot of bad things that happened, but we don't want to just jettison that. We want to look to the past for truth, goodness, and beauty, and for what people did in the past that made a state work versus trying something new that might not work at all. This is why those that are more conservative want to retain the way that things have traditionally been, whereas those that are more progressive want to change that. And this can be issues related to taxation. It can be issues related to economic policy, but it can also be social issues. Someone who's a conservative is going to say, what is the definition of marriage? And they're going to look backwards. Man and woman, monogamous. Somebody who is more progressive or liberal will look to the future and say, well, what could marriage be? Are we stuck in this conservative platform? Maybe marriage can be between two men, two women, three women, whatever it might be. And so that is the idea, though. So to summarize that point, the left, being more liberal or progressive, has a tendency to say truth, goodness, and beauty. What's best for the state will be something we are moving toward. We're moving out of some bad things towards something that is better. Those that are conservative think truth, goodness, and beauty is more found in the past and should be retained, and you should be a little bit suspicious of new ideas. Now, I don't mean new ideas like in medicine or technology. They're not like saying get rid of your iPhone or something like that. But as far as how family works, how taxation works, what role the government should have, how voting should happen, these kind of things. Number two, on the left, you have a tendency, again, these are broad strokes, not everyone agrees with this, but to have more of a large central government. And on the right, you want more decentralized government. It's more of a focus on states' rights. To give a great example of this, Roe v. Wade was overturned recently, a few years ago, and everybody freaked out, kind of on both sides. One side was celebrating, the other side was not celebrating. But what most people didn't understand what the issue was. The issue was not abortion. Okay? Pay attention to what I'm saying if you think the issue was abortion. The issue was not abortion. The issue was, is abortion a constitutional right? Okay? So what the Supreme Court justices decided was not, women have no rights, you can't get an abortion. What they said was, this is a states' rights issue. It is not a constitutional issue. You're not going to find some right to abortion in the Constitution. Again, I'm not giving you my political position. I'm just telling you that's a fact. If I want to defend abortion, there's an argument I can give, but it's not from the Constitution. And so if I want to shoot down abortion, there's an argument that I can give. And it's also not from the Constitution, because the issue was, is abortion a constitutional federal big government thing, or should it be reserved to the states? And it should be reserved for the states because anything not explicitly mentioned or by necessary logical deduction in the Constitution belongs to the states. And so you have large centralized government pushed on the left and then more of a decentralized government pushed on the right. On the left, you have more of a focus on pure democracy, counting heads. On the right, you have more of a focus on a republic and the electoral college. Okay, now it's interesting. Individual rights do, in a sense, conflict. Individual head counting of votes sometimes can conflict with the electoral college. One emphasizes states' rights, the other emphasizes individual rights, and the two are at odds. By getting rid of states' rights, you increase individual rights. By getting rid of individual rights, you increase states' rights on that particular issue. So it's interesting. You are going to have a limiting of rights one way or the other. But there is a tendency for those on the left to sometimes push more for a pure democracy, whereas those on the right would say, no, you can't do that. A pure democracy can sometimes override the rights of a minority. So you have to have a republic. You have to have certain rights that are protected regardless of what the masses think. And so the two sides, again, will fight on that. Some say, well, we need to count heads. We need a pure form of democracy because at the end of the day, more people living in a country should have more of a say than the minority. Whereas the other side would say, no, you can have a tyranny of the majority. And so you have to respect things like states' rights. You have to respect certain boundaries that cannot be voted away, etc. On the left, you have more of a regulated market that the government will help things function more freely. Sometimes when you get this unregulated market, you get some crazy things that happen economically and financially. Whereas on the right, they're going to say, no, a deregulated market works much better. Read Adam Smith. Go read Wealth of Nations. He's very clear that when people pursue their own interest, everyone benefits. Yes, the gap between rich and poor is bigger, but the poor are higher up than poor in other countries. Our homeless people have cell phones, and they don't have cell phones when they're homeless in Africa. And so it's a different approach. So you have one, though, that says the government should have more intervention in economic policies and in the market. And then you have another one that says that they should have left. Next, you have on the left, it tends to be more communitarian, whereas on the right, it tends to emphasize more individualism. So the left is going to say we need to do things that are better for the group or the whole. Those on the right will say, no, what's better for the group or the whole is protecting individual rights, which is better for everybody. And then you can voluntarily work together. So it's not as though left is saying group and right is saying no group. Left is saying a group that is set up in the fabric and the structure of the government or set up in the structure of our lives, kind of imposed top down. Whereas the right says, no, those kind of structures should be voluntary. That's something that you should consider. On number 6, again, I've got so many. This is going to take forever. Let's take a little break. We'll have some fancy music.
Young man, there's no need to...
6, positive rights versus negative rights. Pay attention to this because this is huge. Both sides want their rights, and they want their rights protected. Those on the left have a tendency to push for what are called positive rights. What does that mean? That means the government gives you something, whether that's healthcare, whether that is Social Security, a program that's set up for you, different types of welfare programs. When people say, I have a right to education or I have a right to healthcare, they're talking about positive rights. What that means is that the government is positively giving you something. Those on the right are going to talk about what are called negative rights. What that means is the rights you have are given to you in the Constitution. They're actually given to you before that. They're natural and inalienable, but the Constitution codifies them. And so you have your rights. Negative rights means the government's job is to get out of your way. It's to prevent the government or other individuals from hindering you from doing what you want to do. So your rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, whatever, those are rights that you have. The government doesn't give them to you. The rights that their job is to protect those rights. It's to keep others from trying to get in your way or take those from you. Whereas those on the left say, no, the government owes you more than that. They owe you positive rights. They owe you, again, depending on what it is, whether it's healthcare, education, welfare systems and programs, etc. Okay, so they're meaning rights in a different way, typically on the right and on the left. By the way, you're realizing how polarized the two parties have become. This was not always the case, okay? Many people decades ago would vote for whoever their favorite candidate was, and they didn't care about the party. The parties are extremely polarized today. What was the biggest debate 60 years ago? I don't know, Social Security or something? Whereas today, it's in every issue. It's moral issues, it's social issues, it's marriage, it's transgender surgery, it's everything, right? Number 7. The left has a tendency to ask this question when making decisions. What would be ideal? Okay, in a perfect world, what would be ideal? The right has a tendency to ask this question. What would practically work? So one is asking, what would we do in a perfect world? The other one's saying, in a world that's not perfect and will never be perfect, what would practically work? Again, those are different ideologies or ideologies, hashtag ideological. Get the t-shirt made. Buy some swag. Number 8. On the left, you have a focus on environmentalism and the focus on climate change. On the right, you have more of a focus on what are called industrial rights. So whereas the left will say, hey, the globe is getting hotter, we're putting out all these harmful emissions, we need to restrict certain forms of industry. The right will say, don't restrict certain forms of industry. We need to produce electricity cheaply. We need to produce, gasoline cheaply, et cetera. Allow me to go pursue business. So there's disagreement on these issues. Number 9, the LGBTQ plus movement versus traditional heterosexuality. Again, the left is going to push more for what they would consider to be sexual liberation, and the right is going to push more for what they would consider to be traditional views of marriage and sexuality. As a clarifier there, though, the right is not saying you don't have a right to do what you want sexually with another consenting adult. The right says you do. The right says that you don't have a right to read that onto other people. You don't have meaning, if you're a man and you want to marry a man, you can do and say whatever you want, but it's not marriage, so don't make it a governmental thing. Or if you want to dress like a woman and say that you identify as a woman, you can do whatever you want, just don't make me have to use your pronouns. You think about gender what you think about gender, and I'll think about gender what I think about gender. We both get to think and use the words that we want when it comes to gender. You respect my rights, I'll respect your rights. Don't do drag shows for kids or whatever it is. And so there is it's not that one party says you have the freedom to do this and the other doesn't. Both parties would say constitutionally you have the freedom to do what you want with other consenting adults sexually. What they're going to say, though, is where does this play out in other areas of society where it's forced upon you? Those on the left, though, will counter and say, what do you mean? You're not allowing me to live a certain way. You are persecuting me by using these kind of terms and such. So it has to be government mandated. So they disagree on these issues. Number 10, the left is for gun restrictions for legal gun owners, and the right is gun rights for legal gun owners. Why did I phrase it that way? Why didn't I just say pro-gun and anti-gun? Neither party is for illegal gun use. Neither party is for violent, gun violence. Like you'll see all these statistics about gun violence. Neither party wants gun violence. Or I remember after there was a mass shooting, there was a school that did this big march and protest against gun violence, which I thought, who's for gun violence? The left is for the restriction for legal gun owners, and the right is for gun rights for legal gun owners. The bad guys are going to do what they want regardless. So you're only ever talking about with gun control stuff for those that follow the laws anyway, for those that are legal gun owners. Should there be more restrictions because kids can gain access to them, or because even people that are law-abiding citizens can snap, people can commit suicide, etc.? Or should there be more rights to protect yourself from the bad guys that have guns? Because they'll always have guns. Remember, a gun-free zone, and I'm going to have a whole issue on gun control just because it's fun. I'm going to do it while wearing weapons. I'm kidding. Remember, the gun-free zones are only gun-free for people that follow those signs. They're self-defense free zones. They're not actually gun-free zones. But that's that one you can see where I lean, but not on every issue. Anyway, so that's just because I'm a shooting instructor and I like guns. Bang, bang. All right. Number 11, the left is for looser immigration policies. The right is for stricter immigration policies. The left thinks it should be easier to become a citizen. Many on the right think it should be easier to become a citizen, but it is stricter with immigration policies on the right, especially with the border crisis that we've had in the U.S. recently. I'm in 2024 right now as I'm recording this. And so over the last few years, there's been quite a bit. And so right now, this is actually something that you're seeing the parties agree a little bit more on. They're both saying, hey, there is a crisis, there is a problem, but they disagree on how to fix it. They disagree on practical issues that come up. So almost any issue that comes up every week, you're going to get commentary on the left and the right on whatever the issue is. This can be anything from the killing of a gorilla to school stuff to whatever it is. I think a great example of this would probably be the COVID pandemic. So the left and the right, the COVID-19 pandemic responded differently to that pandemic. Both took precautions. Red states and blue states took precautions. Blue states typically took more precautions. But it's an ideological difference, whereas the left had a tendency to promote greater safety at the expense of liberty. The right had a tendency to promote greater liberty at the expense of safety. So one of the questions you have to ask is, during something like a national pandemic, or in this case, international, What is the role of government? Is it to protect your liberties and advise you to keep you safe? Or is it to mandate things to keep you safe and keep others safe at the restriction of your personal liberties? That's a question you can answer for yourself. The left is pro-choice and the right is pro-life. And this is pretty stark. This is a pretty stark contrast, okay? Some people on the right will allow it for certain reasons, incest or rape or something like that. But generically, in broad strokes, the right is typically against all forms of abortion, whereas the left is for that, because what they're going to say is you've got to protect the choice of the mother. Though there's a baby, or they would say a fetus, in that woman, it is in her body, and so she needs to have some sort of say of how this works. It's my body, my choice. And so the right's going to say, yes, the baby's in your body, but the baby's not your body. It has a different heart and a different brain and different DNA. It's a different human, so it's not the same. And so they'll go back and forth. The left will say it's not really fully a human until it's viable or until it's out of the womb or whatever it might be. The right will say, nope, it's a human in the womb. It has dreams. It kicks. This is a human. By the way, it's never viable. Like once it's born, you still have to take care of it a lot. And so they'll argue back and forth. So, but those are pretty clear party lines on both sides. How do they interpret the Constitution? This is different. On the left, the Constitution should be interpreted, listen to this, as a living document that changes meaning over time and culture. Whereas the right would say the Constitution should be interpreted as an historical document by looking at the original meaning and how it was interpreted throughout America's history. So this is kind of who determines the meaning of a text. It is kind of a hermeneutics question. Both sides, by the way, agree that the Constitution allows the government to vote in new laws and new things and even amendments to the Constitution. So they're not saying it can never change. They're saying, how do we know that the Constitution allows amendments? We look back historically and see that that's what the Founding Fathers meant. Here's why. Here's what it means in this text. Here's how they interpret it. Here's how other courts and the Supreme Court has interpreted it in the past. And they're making a historical case, whereas the left will say, no, that's not how you interpret documents. You don't try to find the author's meaning historically originally. What you do is you find the meaning today. It includes reader response theory. It includes a differing view of hermeneutics and interpretation than the view of the right. But the left thinks it's a living document that changes meaning over time and culture, whereas the right thinks it's an historical document. Number 15, the left is for the legalizing of certain recreational drugs such as marijuana. The right is against the legalizing of certain recreational drugs such as marijuana. Most of them don't push to just legalize all hard drugs like meth. But on these kind of things, and this is a place where I think, I'm not saying this is right, wrong, or moral or immoral. I think legally something like marijuana should be legal because it's less harmful for you than alcohol, and alcohol is already legal, and it's not the government's job to protect you and your health. So that's ironically one of the places where the left seems to be pushing more for individual rights, whereas the right thinks, no, this will lead to the degradation of society. It's a gateway drug. It will hurt these things. And so anyway, take that to be what you will, but that's where they stand on the issue. Number 16, the left tends to be more globalistic, whereas the right tends to be more nationalistic. The left will say, let's be a part of a larger system. Let's work more with other countries. Let's focus on these global issues. The right will say we have to focus on the national stuff first, then we can focus on global issues. And so it has to do with an issue of focus. Both of them want to do what's best for the country or what they believe is best for the country, but they also want to help others. The right will have a tendency to say, let's do what's best for our country first. Then when we have extra and we're in a better place, then we can help others, because the right has been pretty open to going and helping other countries militarily or with aid or whatever. Whereas the left is going to say, hey, we can't consider ourselves first. There are other nations that have it worse than us. We have to consider things globally as a foundational point as well. Number 17, the left tends to be, now this is totally something that's changed. So listen to this versus the little history I gave you at the beginning. Originally, the left was the party of the Democratic South. It was poorer people. It was states' rights. It was pro-slavery. It was all this kind of stuff. That has also shifted. Right now, the left tends to be the party of the cultural elites and the poor. It's very interesting. So on the left, you'll have the poor. A lot of, if you think of cities that are just doing really terrible, you think of Detroit and Baltimore and, Los Angeles as far as like crime and homelessness and these kind of things. Los Angeles is doing great in other areas. they're all left-leaning cities, right? So it tends to be the party of the very poor, but also the cultural elites. Most professors, entertainers, movie stars, a lot of ultra-wealthy cultural influencers that own about big tech companies, all this kind of stuff have a tendency also to be left. So it's really interesting. They're kind of the party of the extremes on the spectrum. It's kind of the poor and then the cultural elites. Whereas on the right, again, right now, these could change, and it wasn't this way in the past. The right tends to be the party of the middle class, kind of the average income earner and above. So maybe you could say middle class and upper middle class. That tends to be the party on the right. The left has a tendency to promote higher taxes, whereas the left wants lower taxes. The idea on the left is if we tax more wealthy people, we'll have more money and programs to help those that are poor. The view on the right is we'll help the poor by putting it more into the economy and growing businesses so that they can be paid more and they can get a better job and there's more jobs to choose from. And so one is wanting the government to care for the poor. The other one says that the poor will naturally be taken care of as the economy as a whole does better. Again, they would say that the rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing. A poor person in America can be overweight. That does not happen in Somalia, which means that though there's a bigger gap between rich and poor, the poor here is higher up than the poor person in a country that doesn't have more of a capitalistic system. Not saying I agree or disagree with that. That's the argument, though. Okay. Number 19, they will promote government taxes on certain vices. So they'll push more for taxing things like sugary sodas. Maybe that will keep people from being overweight, tobacco companies, et cetera, whereas the right's going to push more personal responsibility. Okay. If you've never seen Parks and Rec, it's a great show, and you've got Ron Swanson, who's uberly right-wing, and he is just for like eating all the bacon and drinking all the sugary soda. But they have a what is it called? I didn't put this in my notes. It's called Paunch Burger. It's like a fast food joint, and they have a drink, and the size is called Baby, not because it's small, but it's the size of a baby, and it's just like so much sugar.
How is this a child-sized soda?
Well, it's roughly the size of a 2-year-old child if the child were liquefied. It's a real bargain at $1.59.
The left is going to push more for the government helping tax these vices, whereas the right will say, no, don't tax them. You have personal responsibility. Drink and eat less if you want to lose weight. It's not the government's job to do that. Again, they're going to disagree. Can the government not help? Is it not good to tax tobacco, right? Which makes it harder for people to pay for it. So maybe they won't buy. Should we not be helping people out overcome these vices? Whatever. So those are the views again of the two. Number 20, the left has a tendency to view humans as naturally good or neutral. The right has a tendency to view humans as naturally bad or selfish. This is really important with your politics. Your view of human nature will determine where you land on different political issues. If you think people are naturally good or neutral, then you trust a bigger government because they're going to help people. But if you think that people are selfish and bad, you don't want a bigger government because they're going to use it for the benefit of the government and not the people. Or if somebody shoots up a school because people are naturally good or neutral, the problem is access to guns. If you're on the left, the problem on the right is because people are bad or selfish. The problem is not access to guns. The guns don't kill people by themselves. It's the evilness in the person. Okay, evilness, the evality, the evil. I'm going to come up with these neologisms. It's a fun word. If somebody is a racist, the left will say you can educate that out of them. Again, they're born good or neutral. They just need to be taught. They were taught racism or they're ignorant. Education can solve it. The right's going to say, yes, you can teach them, but that's not going to solve the problem. There are educated racists, and the problem is, again, a moral issue, right? It's selfish and selfishness. Almost done. You with me? Whew. I don't know how you're going to vote after this, but consider these things. Number 21, the left promotes more of social and moral acceptance by a wider audience, whereas the right is going to promote social and moral individuality. Okay? The left is going to say, support this person's social or moral views. The right is going to say, you don't have to support that person's moral or social views. You got to protect their right to do it, but you don't have to champion it. Maybe a good example of this, that sounds kind of generic. Maybe a good example of this is when it's Gay Pride Month.
Why are you gay?
Who says I'm gay?
You are gay.
Whereas those on the left will have a tendency to change their, signature lines and their banners at work and all these things as a rainbow flag or something. The right will say, you don't have to do it. You can if you want. You have a right to, but you shouldn't force people to. Well, we need to have everybody do it to stand behind it and let them know they're supported culturally. Well, they don't have to be supported culturally because people have individual rights and they go back and forth. If you're starting to get discouraged and be like, man, these are different. Yeah, welcome. Number 22, the left has a tendency to promote what's called economic equality and the right economic inequality. Let me be clear. They're not saying that people should have equal rights and not equal rights. They both believe in equal rights constitutionally. The left is going to say, though, that the gap between rich and poor should be closer, whereas the right's going to say, why is that the case? Why should it be closer? Is it morally wrong for somebody who comes up with a great idea and is really smart and talented to get paid more for that idea? And so what you have on the left is there should be the inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor should be narrowed. Whereas on the right, they're going to say, no, you can have really rich and really poor, but the worse off, again, are still better off under a system that has more wealth in the system. And there's nothing wrong with there being a bigger gap between rich and poor. In the same way that somebody can be really educated or uneducated, that person who's really educated didn't do something wrong. It's not like he took it from the uneducated person. There's not a set number of dollars, and as the rich get richer, they eat up more of the dollars, so the poor can't have it. It's not a pie chart, right? Money is just a symbol of an economic system. But the left is going to say, no, wait a second, though. When you have a big gap between rich and poor, the poor can't ever get there. It's not that you have equality. They start further behind the line. Like if you're running a race, it's not just you have two people and one guy's faster. The poor person is starting way behind, and so it's going to take them a lot longer to catch up if they can at all. You have to give them a boost to get that starting line closer. This is why there is sometimes talk on the left, and I'm not saying this is a mainstream left position, but there is talk on the left sometimes of what would some type of redistribution of wealth or higher taxes on the rich look like, versus the right has a tendency to have an allergy to that. On the left, you have body image positivity. On the right, you have promotion of physical fitness. This is a new thing, okay? You'll see a lot of people saying that to be pro-physical health is being a fascist or something like this. On the left, you have the body image positivity movement. So if you are overweight and someone critiques you, they are fat shaming you. A doctor should not tell you to lose weight. You're just as healthy when you're obese as if you're not obese. Those in the gym are promoting, dangerous elitism. So you do have that as a new weird thing that they fight about. The left has a tendency more to favor state-sponsored education, i.e. public schools, whereas the right has a tendency to favor private school, homeschool, or a voucher system where people could take taxes instead of just giving it directly to public schools. They could pick what school they want to send their kid to. Good public schools, good private schools would get more government money, and so it would become a competition. Your kids, it would make the bar higher for education because everyone would be trying to give the best education so they could get money. But anyway, the left has a tendency to sponsor favor state-sponsored education. The right has a tendency not to do that. One, again, is a bigger system. One is a smaller system. One is pretty easy for those who are not wealthy, right? So the poor can send their kids to public school for free. I mean, other than the taxes, but again, a lot of the wealthy are paying those taxes, other than the taxes and then what they have to buy on clothes and supplies and that kind of stuff. So you have that. The right's going to say, well, that's, you kind of get, you get groupthink when the government is doing the education. So anyway. And then lastly, and this isn't lastly, there's so many more. This is such a random lesson. It's just like, hey, I'm going to talk about a bunch of differences. There's a lot more than this. You might not think the way that I've pitched these is fair. You might think I spent too much side on one system. I don't care. In the words of Justin Bieber, you can go and love yourself. 25, the left has a tendency to favor DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and affirmative action, whereas the right has a tendency to emphasize what's called a meritocracy, that somebody should be in a job because they've earned it based on their skill and talent, not based on trying to get a certain number of people with a certain gender or skin color. If you're looking for a surgeon, you want the best surgeon. You don't want the surgeon that just is there because they happen to be of a certain race or gender or sexual orientation or whatever it might be. So, is it hopeless? Maybe. Anyway, so this is a weird lecture for me. Most of my study when it comes to politics is not political science and our modern issues today. That's what this lesson is. It's more political philosophy. I'm much more comfortable reading Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau and trying to figure out what a government should be, the philosophy side, than I am what the government is, which is today. But I think this gives at least some conversation starters. If you are a Democrat, please talk to your Republican friends and please watch right-wing media. If you are a Republican, please talk to your Democratic friends and please watch left-wing media. The only solution is to have a conversation. Also, let me just critique both sides real quick. I'm starting to see both parties move away from the Enlightenment ideal. The traditional Enlightenment ideal, and what you have enshrined in the Constitution, is individual liberty for people to do what they want as long as they're not infringing on the liberty of other people. Please listen to my lecture I have on John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. It's a helpful essay on how much liberty should you have. And his short answer is, as much liberty as doesn't affect the liberty of somebody else. My ability to throw a punch ends at your nose. I'm seeing both groups start to move away from that. I'm seeing the left take away individual liberty and push certain social agendas or governmental mandates. I'm also seeing the right move away from that with some of the Christian nationalism talk and trying to legislate certain types of morality. Morality is always legislated. You shouldn't legislate morality. Really? Murder's against the law, right? Prostitution's against the law. Morality is already legislated. But other things that were traditionally freedoms, they're pushing against. And so, again, we're not saying what is or is not moral. That's not the government's job. The government's job is to be agnostic. It's to protect your rights so you can go decide what you think is moral based on your worldview, and people can't get in your way. So let's go back to the Enlightenment ideal. Let's go back to Voltaire. Let's go back to Locke. Let's focus on these guys promoting these individual liberties, and people, everybody just do your thing. Someone shouldn't be forced to accept your worldview. You shouldn't be forced to accept theirs. Someone shouldn't be forced to use your pronouns. You shouldn't be forced to use theirs. Someone shouldn't be forced to believe your religion. You shouldn't be forced to believe theirs. Selah. There you go. Two-party system in America, ideological. You're welcome.